Welcome back to our channel where we provide updates and undisclosed narratives on Catherine, Princess of Wales and her royal family. We provide you with the exciting news: King Charles confronts Camilla about her shocked behavior towards Princess Catherine in front of the royal staff. A moment of unrestrained human passion has apparently plunged the British monarchy into its most significant internal crisis since the abdication inside an institution characterized by centuries of etiquette and a steadfast image of stability. Insiders at the palace have reported a startling altercation between Queen Camilla and Catherine, the Princess of Wales, which resulted in an extraordinary public display of emotion from King Charles III before astonished domestic personnel. The event, reportedly occurring at a routine staff meeting, has undermined the meticulously crafted picture of family unity and revealed profound divisions inside the House of Windsor. The repercussions, as reported by insiders, have not only resulted in a division among the royal family, but have also compelled the king's closest advisors to engage in urgent damage control as they deal with the constitutional ramifications of a monarch seen to have lost his calm. A private conflict has evolved into a crucial challenge for King Charles's rule. The incident has allegedly positioned the traditionalists against the progressives and tradition against modernity, leaving the king in a dilemma between his spouse and his heir's partner. The murmurs that previously pervaded the royal hallways have escalated into a cacophony of conjecture, jeopardizing the stability of the crown and prompting essential inquiries about the monarchy's destiny and the disposition of its sovereign. The fault line. A tenuous palace. The day of the incident seemed to follow a perfect royal routine. The royal chambers of Buckingham Palace radiated with the subdued expectation that accompanies a formal assembly. Mirrors with gilt frames reflected light from large chandeliers, each crystal polished to a diamond-like luster. The atmosphere was saturated with the fragrance of fresh flower arrangements, lilies, roses, and delphiniums blending with the subtle, pure perfume of beeswax from candles prepared for the evening's celebration. Staff navigated with a refined, almost balletic elegance, their footfall silenced by the plush carpets that had absorbed the secrets of centuries. Voices were maintained at a respectful whisper, creating a harmonious atmosphere of silent productivity. Each detail, from the arrangement of cutlery to the freshness of the linens, exemplified the impeccable order the monarchy aims to convey. However, beyond this facade of beauty, a tangible strain simmered like a deep-sea current agitated beneath a tranquil surface. The Princess of Wales was among the first individuals to perceive it. A person acquainted with her activities that day said that Catherine detected the unease not via any blatant violation of etiquette, but by the gradual, almost undetectable changes in the behavior of the home workers. Passers-by in the passageways performed their bows and curtsies with impeccable precision, their grins flawlessly positioned. However, their expressions were tense, and their glances were brief. Their motions exhibited a frantic energy and a rush that contradicted their apparent composure, as if each had a secret too burdensome to hide. Upon inquiring with a junior footman about the evening's preparations, she noted the young man's too prompt certainty, his grin not extending to his eyes. "All is well, Your Royal Highness," he allegedly said before hastily departing, his words resonating emptily among the tense ambiance. During the morning, the princess overheard snippets of muted discussions that seemed to dissipate as she approached. Words would cease in antechambers and service corridors, leaving just the specter of an incomplete phrase suspended in the atmosphere. On one occasion, she detected a sudden eruption of laughing from a cluster of housekeepers, which abruptly ceased, giving way to anxious whispering that faded into a guilty stillness as her security detail approached the corner. She originally attempted to dismiss it as the enduring palace gossip, the pervasive discourse that has always flourished in the shadow of the king. A big and complicated home, characterized by convoluted hierarchies and long-serving servants, naturally fostered gossip and conjecture. However, this experience seemed distinct. The whispers seemed to possess a more acute, intentional quality, like subdued admonitions. Catherine maintained her cool, a talent refined over 2 decades in the royal limelight. Her task required unwavering poise, and she focused herself on that responsibility. She evaluated preparations for an imminent charitable event, praised the executive chef for the suggested cuisine, and traversed the splendid rooms with a composure that concealed her internal disquiet. However, during the tranquil periods, she could not dispel the sensation that the palace was holding its breath. The crew persisted in their preparations, while the atmosphere became more oppressive. With each hour, the anxiety wholly disconnected from the practical demands of a major function. Images of stoic emperors adorned the ancient walls, seemingly attentively concealing secrets that could not remain hidden for much longer. While preparing for the afternoon briefing and arranging her clothing in a full-length mirror, Catherine reassured herself that she may be too sensitive. The murmurs may just be conjecture on insignificant issues. However, a profound instinct and intuition, honed by years of maneuvering via quiet observation and implicit regulations, understood more accurately. The stage was prepared for an evening of sophistication and decorum. However, it was also ready for an alternative occurrence. Underneath the resplendent chandeliers and the pressed uniforms was an imperceptible fissure, a fault line poised for the seismic event that would rupture it. She could not have anticipated the proximity of that earthquake, nor the intensity of the subsequent aftershock. However, the palace was aware, and shortly all would. The shattering a breach in the chamber. The meeting was held in the White Drawing Room, a venue often used for smaller, more personal royal audiences and briefings. The elongated, polished table mirrored the elaborate ceiling above, with meticulously arranged papers positioned before each chair. The atmosphere was designed to be official, but routine, a conclusive assessment of logistics and timetables. The Princess of Wales positioned herself at the table's head, maintaining impeccable posture, while attentively listening to the master of the household address minor procedural matters. Surrounding her, senior staff members nodded courteously, their pencils at the ready, their attitudes meticulously neutral. Queen Camilla's arrival immediately disrupted the delicate equilibrium. Her entrance lacked the customary soft reverence. She strode into the room with a decisive, heavy-footed intent that instantly captivated every gaze. Her countenance had a rigidity that disturbed even those courtiers well versed in her fluctuating temperaments. She did not wait for the briefing to conclude, or for the king who had yet to arrive to assume his position. Instead, her attention was directed onto Catherine, and an instant deep calm enveloped the room, a quiet laden with sick interest and tangible terror. Initially, her statements were framed as incisive comments, subtly concealed critiques masquerading as inquiries. 2 people there said that she started by interrogating a recent decision about one of Catherine's charity patronages, implying it constituted an overreach. The remarks were incisive, intended to question the princess's decision-making in a public setting. Catherine, preserving her poise, tried to reply with deliberate tranquility. Her voice, however subdued, was unwavering, and her words were selected with diplomatic precision. She tactfully reminded the Queen that the issue had received approval via the appropriate procedures and was centered on obligation, not competition. However, this rational reply seemed to exacerbate the Queen's ire. Her voice escalated, discarding its facade of regal propriety and adopting a harsh, acrimonious tone that had evidently been brewing for an extended period. The comments intensified into explicit allegations. She charged Catherine of seeking media attention and behaving like a celebrity instead of a servant of the crown. The remarks, spoken with increasing intensity, pierced the charged atmosphere like fragments of shattered glass. The personnel remained still, a scene of incredulity. Their gazes oscillated between the 2 highest-ranking ladies in the royal family, their training conflicting with the innate human impulses to either intervene or retreat. They were ensnared, seeing a hallowed border being transgressed. No one shifted. Silence prevailed. They recognized they were situated at a moment that would be inscribed in the palace's clandestine history. The conflict evolved from verbal to violent. In an expression of unmitigated rage, Queen Camilla's fist lashed out. The action was not a strike aimed at the princess, but rather an expression of intense exasperation. She grabbed a leather-bound folder and a pile of briefing papers off the table right before Catherine. The papers ascended, dispersing haphazardly on the floor. The folder struck the leg of an adjacent chair with a harsh percussive sound. The staff's collective gasp was loud and clear, a single expression of astonishment that reverberated against the high, unyielding walls. Catherine shuddered, and withdrew not in wrath, but with an expression of astonished amazement. The air seemed to solidify, disrupted by the profound weight of the recent event. The affair was no longer a clandestine dispute to be murmured in hallways. This event constituted a public unmasking of violent breach of royal etiquette inside its most hallowed domain in the presence of those sworn to protect it. The personnel stayed still. Some compressed their lips into taut, pale lines. Others averted their gaze to the strewn papers on the floor, unwilling to meet the eyes of either royal. They had all pledged vows of allegiance and single allegiance and trained for a lifetime to safeguard the monarchy's secrets until death. However, their loyalty was distinct. The truth was not a secret that could be concealed or rationalized. It had been observed. It was acknowledged. It was experienced. Catherine, while being plainly unsettled, maintained her position. Her respiration was rapid, but her gaze remained unwavering, her pulse pounding against her ribcage. She provided no response, no reprisal. Instead, she let the resonant stillness express her sentiments. In that emptiness, her dignity served as both her shelter and her weapon. Queen Camilla, quaking with a blend of fury and adrenaline, averted her gaze, seemingly unable to endure the oppressive silence of judgment in the chamber. The room lingered in that instant, ensnared between the aftermath of the deed and the terrifying realization that nothing would revert to its former state. The fault line had ultimately ruptured, causing the palace to quiver with the intensity of the fracture. The disintegration. A monarch's wrath unleashed. King Charles III entered this scene of paralyzed astonishment. Upon crossing the door, he encountered not the anticipated courtesy of a customary greeting, but an utter quiet that was almost tangible. His eyes, adept at discerning the nuanced signals of a room, swiftly surveyed the scene, the astonished, averted gazes of his most trusted aides, the pale, composed demeanor of the Princess of Wales, the disordered papers strewn across the floor, and the tense, defiant stance of his wife, whose anger emanated in tangible waves. For a brief while, bewilderment obscured his expression. The oppressive atmosphere in the room conveyed all the information he needed. This was not the stillness of order, it was the silence of disaster. A senior courtier, his visage pallid, made a subtle, almost imperceptible motion toward the queen and princess, and at that instant the king comprehended. The earth seemed to tremble under him, as if the burden of the St. Edward's crown he had donned during his coronation had abruptly intensified. Upon locking eyes with Catherine, her poise disrupted, but her dignity preserved. Something inside him fractured. King Charles, a man who had devoted his life to methodically constructing an image of sovereign authority, a monarch who took pleasure in his contemplative and steady leadership, saw the facade of kingship falter. His voice, when it emerged, was not the measured tone of a sovereign, but the piercing, furious exclamation of a man driven over his threshold. "What has transpired here?" He asserted, his words penetrating the silence with more intensity than Camilla's physical eruption. He did not await a response. Deep down, he was aware that an unforgivable event had occurred, and this realization sparked an uncontrollable rage inside him. Camilla attempted to rationalize her actions, her tone remaining acerbic with wrath, although her defensive remarks further exacerbated the situation. The king's wrath erupted. His voice had lost its royal quality, becoming raw and devoid of artifice, the sound of a husband, a father-in-law, and a king betrayed by those closest to him inside his own palace. In the presence of my staff within this residence, he is said to have bellowed, his voice reverberating throughout the expansive chamber. He vehemently criticized Camilla, making intense and personal allegations that challenged her judgment and respect for the institution. However, his fury was not confined just to her. In his anguish, he also directed his ire at Catherine. His eyes, aflame with a convoluted blend of frustration and desperation, were riveted upon her. "And you," he insisted. "Sovereign, but insisted. Insisted. What prevented you from halting this? What prompted you to let this situation arise?" The questions were clearly unjust, and a portion of him was likely aware of it. They flew like aimless arrows, a frantic effort to hit something, anything, to alleviate the suffocating weight in his chest. The staff stood still, their heads down, their pulses pounding with a mix of trepidation and deep unease. They were educated to serve discreetly, safeguarding the dignity of the crown with steadfast fidelity. However, what they were seeing was the total disintegration of that dignity. Charles, often meticulous in maintaining his public and private demeanor, was yelling uncontrollably. His remarks impacted those present in the room. He vehemently criticized their silence, their frailty, and their collective incapacity to uphold the tenuous order he fervently tried to preserve. In a moment of profound self-reproach, he chastised himself, his voice trembling with emotion as he proclaimed his failure, acknowledging that strife had emerged inside his household under his oversight. Every outburst seemed to further undermine his authority. His movements became erratic, his hands cutting through the air. His voice resonated powerfully before wavering, revealing the extent of his internal conflict. For the first time, the staff saw not a ruler, but a man in disarray. The burdens of lineage, the anticipation of flawlessness, and the relentless pressures of appearance and obligation converged inside him simultaneously. The explosion reverberated through the room more profoundly than Camilla's display of hostility ever could. Catherine remained silent. She maintained an unwavering calm, but her quiet exuded a firmness that Charles in his fury seemed to both covet and detest. Camilla regarded him with a stubborn gaze, resolute in her refusal to acquiesce. Amidst the reticent princess and the rebellious Queen, Charles seemed to sense the crown's gradual relinquishment, if not in actuality, then in essence. His voice only softened at the conclusion, his rant ending not with a demand, but with a fatigued, resigned sigh. However, the damage had already occurred. The king had lost control of his fury, and his most devoted staff saw every instance of his decline. Resonances inside the edifice. A divided palace. Upon the conclusion of the calamitous meeting, the workers exited in a condition of stunned silence. Their footsteps, typically subdued, reverberated against the polished marble flooring of the passageways, each step seeming to hasten away from the psychological debris left in the white drawing room. In the room, dread had silenced them. Upon their dispersal into the intricate corridors of the palace, the whispering started. Their initiation was subtle, akin to the whisper of silk, conveyed via covert looks and muted conversations, but they rapidly proliferated like sparks on parched kindling, rekindling latent allegiances and establishing new rifts. The household, once a cohesive entity serving the crown, started to splinter into factions. The most outspoken faction, albeit in subtle words, supported the Princess of Wales. Their allegiance was apparent in muted discussions among the service kitchens and behind the sealed doors of administrative offices. They expressed respect for her poise, remembering how she remained dignified and unyielding as the queen consort berated her. To many, her composure epitomized the essence of a genuine future monarch. She possesses the strength of the late queen, a long-serving valet was allegedly overheard stating. To withstand that and refrain from descending to that level, that epitomizes true royalty. These voices lauded her silence, not as a sign of weakness, but as deep knowledge and strategic forbearance. A more modest and prudent group sided with Queen Camilla. Their backing was subdued, their arguments more cautious, as they recognized they were defending the indefensible. They said that her outburst was not a manifestation of malice, but of weakness, but rather the culmination of years of effort and despair. They discussed her protracted struggle for acceptability, the persistent and nuanced challenges to her status, and the significant strain she experienced beside a king, as popular love clearly favored the younger generation. Their statements depicted not a reckless aggressor, but a lady driven to her limits, ultimately retaliating to protect her domain. A faithful lady-in-waiting to Camilla reportedly said, "She has fought for everything she possesses. She perceives phantoms where none exist, perhaps, but who can fault her?" These defenders expressed their views only in trustworthy circles, their murmurs remaining contained. However, the most resounding and perilous rumors did not pertain to Catherine or Camilla. They pertained to the king. Staff members who had served him for decades from his tenure as Prince of Wales until his ascension were profoundly unsettled. They inquired how a sovereign, the quintessential emblem of national stability, could relinquish authority so utterly. How could his rage erupt with such volcanic intensity in front of his colleagues, disregarding the repercussions? They described the quiver in his voice, the unrestrained rage in his eyes, and the manner in which his charges had been indiscriminately directed at all. What they saw was not the resolute commanding power of a ruler, but the frantic, unrestrained eruption of a man in distress. Some expressed sympathy for him, convinced that the overwhelming weight of the crown had ultimately shattered his well-crafted facade. Others dreaded him now, apprehensive about the implications of such a violent temperament for those in proximity to the throne. The palace seemed to absorb and magnify these echoes. The old stone walls, which harbored the secrets of the Tudors, Stuarts, and Windsors, resonated with the tremors of these new perilous divides. Each hallway became a channel for rumor, and every antechamber became a receptacle for supposition. Servants started to avert their gazes from one another, not due to disinterest, but from apprehension of what may be revealed in their eyes, indicating whose side they had aligned with. By midnight, the murmurs had merged into a widespread, deleterious haze of ambiguity. Loyalties were tested and allegiances moved not by spectacular proclamations, but by the subtle selection of sides in a covert civil war. At the core of the situation was a crown physically intact but spiritually quaking, as if it sensed the encroaching instability from all directions. The fragmented crown, a sovereign's judgment. The white drawing room was now vacant, but for King Charles, the tumult of the afternoon lingered in the atmosphere like an unseen veil. He sat solitary in his secluded study, a chamber adorned with dark wood and leather-bound tomes, his palms pushed on his temples as if to physically restrain the inner tumult. The calm around him was more overwhelming than the previous cacophony. For the first time since his ascension, he felt bereft of the protective mantle of sovereignty. What persisted was not a sovereign, but a man burdened with remorse, grappling with the humiliating recollection of his lack of self-control. Upon the arrival of his key counselors, they entered without vociferous objections. Their authority was subtle, their assessments conveyed via meticulously chosen language and solemn demeanor. The king's private secretary, a man whose lineage had served the crown for 3 generations, was the first to speak. He reminded the king that the monarchy was founded not alone on power, but on perception. He articulated in a composed, almost clinical manner that its power stemmed not from the crown itself, but from the steadfast public conviction that the crown's bearer was infallible in their obligation to maintain stability. The institution, sir, the advisor allegedly said, is a tenuous agreement. It relies on an unseen picture of stability that must not be disrupted. They cautioned him that by raising his voice and transforming his personal distress into a public display for his workers, he had let the illusion of royal serenity disintegrate. Charles tried to justify his conduct. He asserted that the pressure had pushed him to the brink, the strain was unbearable, and any person would have given up. However, his counselors remained resolute. With utmost respect, sir, another assistant added, "You are not an ordinary man. You are the monarch." A monarch, they informed him unequivocally, could not indulge in the extravagance of overt anger, not in the presence of servants who disseminated murmurs as if they were cash. A solitary outburst, they cautioned him, seen by a dozen individuals, might dismantle years of careful image cultivation and jeopardize the fundamental basis of his rule. The statements impacted him more profoundly than any familial dispute. He had borne the burden of his fate enough to comprehend its expenses, but at that moment he recognized he could have gravely miscalculated its requirements. The crown included more than just riches and diamonds. It represented the unyielding expectation of emotional repression and the perpetual mandate to maintain an image of composure despite internal turmoil. Now that emblematic stability had shattered, leaving him vulnerable. Isolated once again, Charles mentally recapitulated the event. He saw his rage mirrored in the fearful expressions of his subordinates. He saw the astonished incredulity in Catherine's eyes. He saw the resolute fire in Camilla's gaze. Every picture constituted a new anguish. He started to contemplate if history would see him as the opposite of the contemplative, progressive ruler he intended to be, a king who governed neither his realm nor himself. That notion tormented him more than the actual interaction. For the first time, Charles had a deep and alarming uncertainty over his suitability to govern. The magnificence of his status suddenly resembled an ornate prison, its bars shining but inflexible. He yearned for the liberty to exist as an ordinary person, to err without universal repercussions. However, he was acutely aware with unsettling certainty that he irrevocably forfeited such liberty. Kingship was not concerned with his emotions. It pertained to the symbol he conveyed to the world, a symbol that was now fractured. The study was still, and in that stillness the king saw the fracture of his own power beginning. The crown sat upon his head, although for the first time it seemed as if it no longer really was his. Thank you for watching the video. Please let us know your thoughts, and goodbye for now.